Name me one thing in the United States and in some places abroad that you can do without a proper ID. Besides breathing, that is. Greetings and welcome back to Here's What I Heard. I'm Laura DeGoddess, your hostess. Thank you for clicking on my little acre of the internet today. I know that this is a subject that we are seeing all over our feeds at the moment, but yes, I would like to give my opinion on voter ID and the things that I hear when I listen to those who oppose it. First of all, to me, and in reality, what they're talking about is just your ID. Putting a qualifier on it like everyone seems to in saying voter ID connotates that you have to do something super extra special in order to obtain such an ID, which of course we all know is just not true. In fact, in Texas, when you go to change your driver's license from another state or you get your first adult driver's license here, the first thing that they ask you is if you'd like to register to vote. To me, that just seemed like an easier way to get you into the jury pools, because when you register to vote is when most counties enter you in their jury pool or their jury duty roster. Then before you even get your license in the mail, your voter registration card comes in. Valid for the 2-year voting season, and then they expire and you get another one for the next 2-year voting season. But when you go and actually vote, which I highly suggest you're doing in person, you still have to show some kind of identification. Because even the post office will tell you not to send cash in the mail. And votes are way more important than cash. Those little voter registration cards, actually, they send you are even easier to fake than the Social Security cards used to be. Now, I'm going to show you a few examples of what I'm hearing when I see these folks in Texas, especially, that fled in order to shirk their duties to the people of Texas who think they put them there. Which reminds me, before I get into all of that, please make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, and share this video. A donation would be the ultimate, and I'm still sending out unique gifts for your donations. I'm also posting on other platforms due to the censorship that has been happening here. All my links are below. Click on some of them, will ya? Now, to start with, keep in mind that voter ID actually means having to prove who you are in order to vote, no matter how you vote. I mean, how unfair would it be for someone to pretend to be others, to vote many, many times in one way, which actually does suppress the votes of actual lawful voters? My question at this point is, if you would cheat in that way, are you actually cheating to make sure a good person with the purest of intentions gets the position? I think not. It's been my experience that when someone cheats to try to win, they already have convinced themselves that they cannot win, or that they will lose, so their next move is to try and win without even having to compete. To me, that is cowardly and evil, because you, at that point, don't want to win because you're the best. You want to win because you think it will endear you to those who look up to winners, which is everyone. Not to mention the power that winning will give you at that point. In my opinion, you don't have the courage to challenge yourself in order to win or lose on your own terms. I hope that for the most part I've stopped being fooled by these perpetual losers. First of all, because it's a ruse, especially the celebrity ones, as they are just making money off your feelings. And secondly, it's a lie. I have never seen a perpetual loser make anything better or become successful. Never! And it usually always is someone else's fault or because of circumstances beyond one's control. The funniest part of all this is that the actual perpetual losers are the same ones crying because of these new voting laws. From what my research shows on these laws, they're crying foul because these new laws won't allow them to cheat their way into perpetual power. Then they commence to treat us like we know nothing, are nothing and can do nothing without their expertise on nothing. Case in point?
Democrat Texas State Representative James Tallarico, who recently flew on a private plane and currently resides in Washington, D.C.
Remember this one's name and what he's about to say.
James, thank you very much for being here. Now, we know you met with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi today, and the talking points, they've been issued. You've been told to say you're protecting democracy, that Republicans are authoritarians and racist, they're blocking the ballot box, you want voter suppression. I've got it. Texas Republicans are racist. But you're in D.C. now, and the talk is all about H.R. 1, and they're gleefully promoting your effort to promote their national effort. It kind of seems like they're just using you as a prop or a puppet.
So, I'm an 8th generation Texan. I've only been in D.C. twice in my life. This is the second time. I'm a former middle school teacher who ran for office just to try to make my community better.
I'll just bet that was the reason.
And I swore an oath when I first got elected 2 years ago to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and also the Constitution of the great state of Texas.
If that were actually true, there's no way he'd have anything to do with H.R. 1.
And after our former president, Donald Trump, started his big lie that the election was stolen,
they just can't wait to bring him up. It's almost like as if he broke up with them or something, and they just can't get closure.
Republican legislators in capitals
Wait, how did you make this about Donald Trump in 20 seconds? That's a bit of a record. So now you're going to voter suppression, which I get it. But if this is all about your allegiance to Texas and you're an 8th generation Texan and all that, and the Constitution, by the way, the Constitution, Section 1, Article 4, gives authority to the state legislatures, then why are you not in Texas? And why are you in Washington, D.C. doing press conferences with federal officials?
I was just going to answer that.
Oh, really now? I see we have another mind reader, or someone that's able to tell the future on our hands on this one.
It's a great question. And what I was saying is when President Trump lost the election, he told Republicans across the country that he didn't lose the election. And this caused Republican legislators in state capitals from Georgia to Austin to start putting forward bills that would make it harder to vote. And actually, Texas is one of the hardest places to vote in the whole country.
This is not true. He only says this because of the fact that Texas requires ID in order for you to vote. That's any way you decide to vote, in person, early, absentee, mail-in, whatever. Texas requires ID. It's not that hard to do. In fact, like I said before, they even register you when you get your ID.
And so when this started, many of my Democratic colleagues tried to negotiate with our fellow legislators, most of them Republicans, to try to make the bill less damaging, less harmful, less dangerous to constituencies across the state of Texas.
It's funny, he actually makes it sound like people risk their lives to go and vote. Where is it that people are having to climb over ridges and mountains and cross rivers to go and vote? This is ridiculous. It doesn't cost anything to go and vote, and showing your ID should be a no-brainer.
Unfortunately, our Republican colleagues didn't want to negotiate with us.
Gee, I wonder why nobody wants to negotiate with the Democrats anymore. Their form of negotiation is demands, name-calling, and then running away. You can't actually negotiate with anyone that's not there.
Of early voting and adding an hour of voting too much? Is it too difficult to provide, I don't know, your driver's license number and the last 4 digits of your social security number? Is that too much to ask a voter in Texas?
So what this bill does, I'm glad you asked because it gives me an opportunity to correct something you said earlier, which is that this bill actually reduces the amount of time for early voting.
Oh, it does?
He means that they take away the 24-hour provision that they added for the sake of the Rust fee. Still, even when that was there, who in the world woke up in the middle of the night and went, "Oh shit, I forgot to vote. Let me get my robe and slippers and head on down there real fast before it's too late"? Show of hands. Who went out and voted at 3 in the morning in Houston? I don't think anybody did. Anybody that was out that late was probably too drunk to even think about voting or politics or...
Yeah, so in Texas currently, a county can extend voting to 24 hours. You can actually vote all night, which is really convenient if you work during the day. A lot of working folks aren't able to get off work to go vote.
It's voting at 2 a.m. in the morning. It's voting at 2 a.m. in the morning that is the key issue. Is there anyone in Texas that's not currently able to vote? Because I've heard the hyperbole. This is Jim Crow. This is voter repression. This is the Civil War from the leadership of your party. Is there currently a single example you can provide me of a registered citizen voter in Texas that can't vote if we're fighting the Civil War here?
Thankfully, this bill has not passed yet, and God willing, it won't pass.
No, if the bill passes, will there be any minority or woman that's not able to vote?
So the person who oversees elections is appointed by a Republican in the state of Texas. It's a Republican-appointed Secretary of State. And she actually said that Texas's elections in the past 2 cycles were safe, smooth, and secure.
Notice he mentioned her party affiliation, which means in this case, we can't trust what she just said.
Those were the 3 words that she used to describe it.
But we also had, as you pointed out, your party has pointed out time and time again, we needed to expand these things because of COVID. And by the way, I didn't see a whole lot of COVID going on that private plane without those masks, but I digress. So if COVID's not there or ultimately minimized in our application, shouldn't we be making sure that the rules go back to something that makes sense, that's reasonable?
That's a great question.
Why does he keep praising him about great questions? I think it's because he doesn't really know the answers. That's a stall so he can think of some lie to tell us.
I think, in the pandemic, we learned that a lot of things can be made more convenient and more accessible. A lot of folks are working from home instead of having to go into the office. And that's exactly what we learned in voting. We can change some of our voting systems to be more accessible.
Quick question, are you okay with voter ID? Are you okay with voter ID? Because you're going back to the talking points. I get it. The talking points have been issued. Are you okay with voter ID?
So voter ID is currently required in the state of Texas. I opposed having to
How about for mail-in ballots? How about having to send your ballot in? Should you have to prove who you are? Because that's what Democrats are opposing.
Pete, I just said I oppose voter ID.
Which, like I said before, was just ID, and he opposes it. So I wonder how long it's going to be before people start marching to abolish showing ID to purchase alcohol. Or bang bangs. Or when are we going to start opposing ID for everything else we do on this planet? Actually curious to see how that would work out.
Yeah, currently it's a law in Texas, but I oppose that law because I think you don't need it.
You oppose voter ID? You don't think the most sacred obligation of our republic, you should have to prove who you are in order to vote?
So there are a lot of Texans, actually hundreds of thousands, who don't have a driver's license, who don't drive at all.
Do they have a Social Security number? Because according to this Republican law, you can put your last 4 digits of your Social Security number in as proof of who you are. Do they not? No, help me out. Do those people not have Social Security numbers? And who are these people that can't get IDs?
So, Pete, if you're talking about the bill that we're currently focused on, not past Texas law,
I don't believe that's what he was talking about.
What this bill is going to do is not only reduce voting hours, it's also going to empower these partisan poll watchers who are going to look over voters' shoulders and prevent them from exercising their God-given right.
Partisan poll watchers, you mean the ones that weren't allowed in certain states at certain times in certain places, whether you agree with that or not? So Texas says maybe we should have partisan poll watchers on either side, Republicans and Democrats, right? It wouldn't just be Republicans.
Do you remember a second ago when I talked about the big lie? This is exactly what I'm talking about. And the reason that so many folks believe in this country is because folks like you get on television, James, every night and said
you don't want voter ID. We're not talking about that. You just went on national television and said you don't want voter ID, revealing exactly what Democrats. And it's so condescending to say that people can't get identification. Have you found someone in your district that can't get identification?
You have made a lot of money personally, and you've enriched a lot of corporations with advertising by getting on here and spewing lies.
Wow, a typical personal attack. And about something that is completely irrelevant to the situation and actually isn't a bad thing. That's what he's paid to do. Just like this Democratic operative, if you will, is doing what he's paid to do. Or at least that's what he'll tell you.
And conspiracy theories to folks who trust you. And so what I'm asking you to do is to tell your voters right now that Donald Trump lost the election in 2020.
At least you've resolved the lie that is Democrats are now for voter ID. It's not your show, sir. But at least you resolved the idea that Democrats are not for voter ID.
in 2020?
real quick.
Can you answer the question? Did Donald Trump lose the election in 2020?
Here's another typical tactic of that side. They start telling you what to say. Like, you gonna tell me this? Are you gonna answer my question? Are you gonna tell me this? This guy tried to take over the interview. The interviewer asks the questions, not the guy being interviewed. But it's typical. They try and take everything over. In most cases, it's anything for a soundbite that they can use against you.
Questions, don't really feel any obligation to answer anything
an uncomfortable
of you.
question for you?
No, it's...
See, this is Pete, the reason
my
I bring
question
this
is,
up
why are
because
you
this
in Washington, D.C. and not in Texas when your job is in Texas? Because you know it's inevitable that this bill is going to pass. Eventually, you're going to have to pay your hotel bill and go back to Texas, and Governor Abbott will declare a special session. So you're being used by national Democrats to try to pass H.R. 1 to federalize elections, which you, as a Harvard grad, should know better, because the Constitution puts that in the hands of state legislators who are supposed to be in their state, and you happen to be in Washington, D.C. I don't understand how you square that circle.
I can answer. So based on the oath that I took for this office, I have to uphold the Constitution. I have to uphold our democratic system. And I, as a Texas Democrat, I'll tell you this, we lose a lot on the floor of the Texas House. We lose votes on abortion and guns and immigration.
I personally don't see that as a bad thing. And, by the way, anybody notice how much this guy's sweating? Or is he spitting on himself?
Flee the state on those. Why is this number one? Is this the biggest?
That's how democracy is supposed to work.
All right,
the reason this is different,
we're going back.
The reason this is different is that they're trying to rig the rules of the game.
Another typical ruse. Do the thing and point the finger to the other side. When are we gonna stop tolerating this mess? How annoying and condescending was this guy? I heard a lot of crap emanating from his pie hole, but this is also what I saw when watching this young man. When he was made to try to explain himself, pretty much for the most part, all he could do was personal attacks. And of course, he has a giant case of TDS, to the point of where he's attributing what these Republican senators and lawmakers are doing because of one thing that Trump said. I think it has more to do with the fact that the Democrats insisted on all of these things for COVID, and COVID is gone now. And we had no intentions on making these things permanent, as where they did. And are now using their typical mantras of name-calling, etc. I'm not going to go into which names, you know what they are already. For not agreeing with making these things permanent, which actually literally seem to be doing nothing but jeopardizing an actual free and fair election. You can actually do some research and find that the audits that they're doing now is finding all kinds of havoc. And who else is just dead tired of being lied to continuously by our dear leader?
It's clear for those who challenge the results and question the integrity of the election, no other election has ever been held under such scrutiny and such high standards.
I can think of a couple of more. There was actually one in 2016 in which people are still saying there was problems with. So, I don't know. Your election hasn't been around long enough to have that much scrutiny yet.
You don't call facts fake and then try to bring down the American experiment just because you're unhappy.
I sure wish he would say that to some of the people that have been burning our cities down lately and that want to defund or dismantle the police.
About the obstruction we face. Legislation is one tool, but not the only tool. And it's not the only measure of our obligation to defend democracy today. For example, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that the United States Department of Justice is going to be using its authorities to challenge onslaught of state laws undermining voting rights in old and new ways.
What is this onslaught that he speaks of? Again, he's making it sound as if it's one of the most dangerous things in the entire world. And how many states have actually changed any laws in the last couple of months since he's been in office? Florida, Georgia, and Texas is working on it? That's an onslaught. I also hope that this DOJ interference announcement is another one of his hyperbolic lies. But you never know with this guy.
In Texas, for example, the Republican-led state legislature wants to allow partisan poll watchers to intimidate voters and imperil and impartial poll workers.
He basically told people that the Republicans are legislating people to intimidate voters and poll workers, to the point of, even if by accident, using the word imperil.
They want voters to dive further and be able to be in a position where they wonder who's watching them.
I think we're already in that position there, Joe. Especially if we're on platforms like this.
And intimidated. To wait longer to vote. Drive a hell of a long way to get to vote. They want to make it so hard and inconvenient that they hope people don't vote at all.
Not only is this very incoherent, but it's very incorrect. The biggest bunch of gobbledygook I think I've heard in a long time.
That's what this is about. This year alone, 17 states have enacted, not just proposed, but enacted 28 new laws to make it harder for Americans to vote. Not to mention, catch this, nearly 400 additional bills Republican members of the state legislatures are trying to pass.
As if Democrats never try to pass anything.
21st century Jim Crow assault is real. It's unrelenting. We're going to challenge it vigorously.
Notice how they keep bringing that up? My only response to that is, you would know. But it's not coming from, nor has it ever come from, the Republican side.
Have you no shame?
This statement or question seemed to come out of nowhere and actually is quite rich coming from this person.
This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. It's literally about who we are as Americans. It's that basic.
I'm sure that he doesn't believe that, but he wants us to. And here comes the guilt trip.
It's about the kind of country we want today. The kind of country we want for our children and grandchildren tomorrow. And quite frankly, the whole world is watching.
This is definitely a domestic problem. Why are we worried about what the world is thinking?
So hear me clearly. There's an unfolding assault taking place in America today, an attempt to suppress and subvert the right to vote and fair and free elections, an assault on democracy, an assault on liberty, an assault on who we are as Americans. For make no mistake, bullies and merchants of fear, peddlers of lies are threatening the very foundation of our country.
Yes, we're listening to one right now. And yes, that's exactly what he and his administration is doing.
Gives me no pleasure to say this. I never thought my entire career I'd ever have to say it. But I swore an oath to you, to God, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution.
Is that why you're so adamant about taking away our Second Amendment, or telling us that no amendment is absolute? Is that why we're finding out from your press secretary, who actually does these press releases in your voice, telling us that you guys are now working with the big tech to censor people against the First Amendment? Let's see, what other amendment do you plan on stomping on next?
The assault on free and fair elections is just such a threat, literally. I've said it before. facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole.
Rumor has it that if you have to say that, it is hyperbole. I actually agree with him on the point that the attacks that the United States is seeing is similar, and we haven't dealt with stuff like this since the Civil War. However, the voting laws are not comparable to the Civil War. The thing that is comparable to the Civil War are the things that we're seeing in these big cities right now, where they're burning and looting and rioting. This is where people are fighting in the streets and getting injured and expiring. No one is dying for the voting booth. No one will die because of these voting regulations. No matter what they do say about them, and even if they do seem oppressive, no one is going to die because of these voting laws. No one. Unless, of course, they start a civil war over them.
Since the Civil War, the Confederates back then never breached the Capitol, as insurrectionists did on January the 6th.
No, they just owned other people and made them work relentlessly while abusing them, and then fought for the right to do so. But the insurrectionists on the 6th, they were the people that we really have to be afraid of.
I'm not saying this to alarm you. I'm saying this because you should be alarmed.
What do you even say to stuff like this? I'm not saying this to alarm you, but, and of course the but negates everything you just said in front of it, but you should be alarmed. Well, I am, but not because you say so. I'm alarmed because we have someone in charge that would actually say something like this.
I'm not saying this to alarm you. I'm saying this because you should be alarmed.
That's quite enough of him at the moment. We must move on to his sidekick. Watch at your own risk.
Is agreeing to voter ID one of those compromises that you'd support?
I don't think
Even if it was accidental, these first 3 words actually tell us everything we need to know about this person.
that we should underestimate what that could mean. Because in some people's mind, that means, well, you're going to have to
Another mind reader, I see.
Xerox or photocopy your ID to send it in to prove you are who you are. Well, there are a whole lot of people, especially people who live in rural communities, who don't, there's no Kinko's, there's no Office Max near them. People have to understand that when we're talking about voter ID laws, be clear about who you have in mind and what would be required of them to prove who they are. Of course, people have to prove who they are, but not in a way that makes it almost impossible for them to prove who they are.
Did anyone order a word salad sandwich? Well, at least she wasn't cackling, but when she's not cackling, she's essentially making things up. She must have practiced this question in front of a mirror. So now, not only is it really hard to get an ID to begin with, for reasons, you know, too dumb, not aware of where to attain an ID, too expensive, color of your skin? But now, we can't even get copies of the IDs that we can't get to begin with? Definitely some mental gymnastics going on with that lame justification. Oh, think of the folks that it might affect. Now she's trying to tell everyone to predict the future like she tries to. And besides that, if you actually have to go somewhere to get a photocopy of your ID, why not just go vote in person? Just show your ID, no fuss, no muss, and you're done with both. Simple. Here's a tip, or life hack if you will. Learn to use that incredibly powerful tool that everyone carries around for everything else in the world that they do, including taking pictures. In other words, make your ID strike a pose. Think of it as a different kind of a selfie. How about this for fear-mongering?
Normally put poll watchers in minority areas and they are normally people of different nationalities than the areas that they placed them.
Okay, so I don't see anything so unusual about that. This country is made up of all kinds of different nationalities, so it just makes sense that all different nationalities would be poll watchers.
And they are there to intimidate the workers. Not the workers, but they intimidate the voters.
I think she slipped up and said the quiet part out loud there.
And when people walk into a poll and they see these strange persons in their polling place looking at them mean-spirited, it's frightening.
Give me a break. People looking mean-spirited? Now they're legislating people looking mean-spirited in the polling places? Only folks I see intimidating anyone are the ones y'all keep letting out of prison to wreak havoc for your pleasure, agenda, power.
And sometimes they may just get up and walk out.
Are they allowed to be armed?
Intimidation.
Can those poll watchers be armed?
Well, that's a good question.
Who else just saw a sparkle in her eye just then? Oh, goody. You just gave me another idea for another law to try to pass.
Particularly since we have just passed the permitless gun bill. We know that the person themselves who presides over the poll can in fact have a gun. But whether the poll watchers would be permitted to have one is another question. I would predict that they probably could.
Constitutional carry means anyone can essentially have a gun on them at most any time. So, my advice would be to stay polite and don't act a fool if you're afraid of the tool. Oh wait, that actually seems to be working in Chicago. Or is it? So, why do all these folks seem not to care about the integrity of our election system? Well, in my opinion, most of the folks, especially in the Democratic Party, are very old and have been in power for a very long time. Their long tenure is complete with being busted or doing some pretty awful and unlawful things during their careers. I would imagine that they all wish to perish while in office or while holding office so that they can neither be held accountable for their actions nor be retaliated against from folks that they may have wronged in the throes of their power. But I could be wrong. I do hope you enjoyed my video today. Thanks to everyone for their patience. After our escapades with the Rusvy, I am doing my very best to get back to my regular scheduled videos, and even more than ever now, if you would like to see me continue my work and help me with my goal of becoming a call-in talk show, and beating the censors and the hospital bills, please make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, and share this video. A donation would be the ultimate, and I'm still sending out unique gifts for your donations. I'm also posting on other platforms due to the censorship that has been happening here. All my links are below. Click on some of them, will ya? Don't forget to click on the bell so you don't miss any of my stuff. Thank you for clicking on my little acre of the internet today. Until next time!